So we are basically missing a panelist. My name is Uroš. I come from Slovenia, Jožef Institute, and I'm also a professor as well as a fellow WAAS. With me here, I have another colleague of mine, Saulo Bahia. He's a federal judge in Brazil, professor of law at the Federal University of Bahia, a trustee of WAAS and fellow WAAS. With us, do we have?
She's not here.
Online, we are also missing.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like she's here.
Annika just joined. So the second panel is going to be Annika RAO-MONARI. She's the CEO, co-founder of Clee AI, and she's going to join us online. But with this, I would like to open this panel by which is dealing with addressing errors, cultural bias, and hallucination in AI-based and traditional education. So the statement which we will work on is hallucination is never new, nor it is a monopoly of AI. Human thinking has always been fraught with the mental, social, and cultural biases born of the past experiences. The quest of science is to reduce the occurrence of an error, presumption, misconception, and prejudice. This session will seek to learn from recent experiences in AI and become more conscious of the influence of factual distortions in prevailing education and the develop ways to reduce errors, biases in both AI and traditional education. It sounds very complex, but we're going to try to actually break down this to key ideas and applications. I wrote here four major ones. The first one is hallucination and AI versus human thinking, which we need to work on. So basically AI hallucination, if you don't know this, AI generates outputs which are factually incorrect or nonsensical, often due to limitation in training data or algorithms. This actually reflects in a hallucination. The same way, human hallucination refers metaphorically in the ways human thinking can be distorted by biases, misconception, flow reasoning processes, which is similar to AI. And like AI relies on training data, which is basically the human way past experiences. And then, we both are failable, but in different ways. Second point should be a role of science in mitigation errors, which is because hallucinations are actually based on errors. So science of both processes and discipline is fundamentally about reducing those errors and biases. This is what we need to know about this. And third is intersection of AI and education. We need to understand, how to actually implement this. So and potentially highlight and address the biases in human education. So we can actually so if you have AI system feedback, you can identify patterns of bias in teaching materials or students, or you can have adaptive learning systems. And the fourth, I think we should focus at the end to practical implications, what that means for AI development in terms of mechanisms to detect the correct hallucinations, and for education, which encourages the meta recognition. I would start first with our colleague online. So we would give ladies first hand. Annika, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. So you're coming basically from the education, from the entrepreneurship background, which deals with the practical applications. Please, can you tell us a little bit about this? In your experience?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. I think, from my perspective, one of the most, people speak about hallucinations and this concept of a fundamental truth that theoretically exists, that we all fundamentally agree on. But the question that I often have is that, does that really exist? Is that really true? I mean, you know, in the sense of, if you look at historical textbooks that are in education in schools, you know, for example, I personally grew up in a variety of different countries, and you know, it was interesting to see the same matter being discussed from a completely different perspective, and the truths that we were examined on were not truths in other places. And you know, the question is, like, do we, what, I think one of the questions that hasn't really been posed yet, in my opinion, is what would a truthful AI actually look like, right? So if we were to take the premise that it was possible to have no hallucinations, is there even a definition that we as a society can agree on of what an AI would behave like if it were zero hallucinations and it was honest? What kind of answers should it give? Should it give all perspectives? Are some perspectives wrong? Maybe some people value more news outlets or different news outlets than other people do. So at what point and how do we kind of tackle that problem, you know, starting with almost, you know, you mentioned practical application as an entrepreneur working with very large companies and also small companies. You always want to start with the product requirements and the kind of needs of the people and what you're solving for. And I think that there's like a really important and underspoken about lack of clarity on what's required. And I think if we got to the point where we actually agreed on, okay, what does without biases mean? What does without you know, hallucinations mean? Because people make things up all the time, right? You know, if we can get an answer to that question, then we can build it. I'm confident we can build it, but I don't think we really know what that is yet.
Do you have any ideas, you know, is there any current push in the industry in order to actually do this kind of things? So develop the mechanisms for direct or, you know, current hallucinations.
It's an interesting, so the problem that we have fundamentally right now that everyone's kind of scrambling around is that 97% of the world's data is locked away, right? So AIs are actually only trained on 3% of the world's data. And the problem with that, it's basically publicly available data on the internet, and all the AIs kind of have the same data. The problem is, like, you know, there's like an extra dimension to that data that's certainly missing, which is, you know, what would be required in order to answer some of these questions, which is, you know, okay, like, what makes this source reliable under what conditions, right? You know, it's like almost like the user behavior or the user interaction with that data, and their kind of valuation of it, and then assimilating attributes across the users that were engaging with it and like that versus other ones, and maybe seeing if we can group populaces together based on how much they like certain data versus other data, or what have you, so that we can present it in different ways and experiment in that dimension is what I'm saying. We don't have that data, let alone, you know, the 400 million small businesses in the world. You know, they keep their financials, they keep their you know, customer data, all of these in a variety of SaaS products, you know, in papers. No AI has access to any of that data. So in terms of being able to even get to solving a problem like that, it feels like we're so far away from even scratching the surface of data that gives us even an understanding of what the implications of a hallucination are, or what the implications of a cultural bias are to people and their behavior. In terms of the pushes to get there, I can say I've worked on projects, and my company, we're very much focused on trying to retrieve that data. So as the large language models become more fundamentally stable and robust, people are starting now to think more about the application layer, and they're starting to think, okay, you know, how do we build an application for education, for, you know, maybe being able to let students be more fascinated and take their curiosity and dive deeper into a topic if it's not in the curriculum, for example. People are starting to think about these kinds of applications, which is great. The only problem is those applications require a certain amount of data, and over time they'll generate a certain amount of data that will be useful for the AI. But because of the approach we're taking right now, which is very much like, let's use what we have and let's try and push forward and let's try and impress the world and let's try and, like we assume that AI is this omnipotent thing, really it knows 3% of what, collectively we know as a society. And fundamentally, I think we have to work on that problem first. And we need to work on defining, once you analyze some of that other data and those other dimensions, what does that mean in terms of what the outcome we want as a society is for what does hallucination mean? How do we deal with that? What does bias mean? How do we deal with that? So I think the industry is moving towards caring about data, but right now we're not at the point yet where people fundamentally realize we can't really progress unless we define the data that we need and define the outcomes we need, and then find the data and aggregate it in order to create these applications that will help.
Okay, what about the misuse, of this kind of hallucinations? Now we're talking about positive effects, but there could be negative. If you're generating just enough of false data, you can actually cause mass hallucinations. So this would definitely lead to a misuse of data and false hallucinations, not improvement. Would this be a feasible statement and something that we should be worried at the same time as we're trying to correct the errors? Because the correction of errors depends on a large number of data. So if the data generated is false, you will have anyway false. It will lead to false.
It's a good point. The problem that I have is really like, how do you define false? Like at what point, what makes something false, right? There are some obvious things, of course. There's some obvious things, of course. There's obviously, some basic truths, right? Like if someone asks, what is 15 plus 2 and the thing answers 20, that's a very clear hallucination of information. The question is, why did it answer like that? And that's probably kind of a poor example. But if you said, what happened in, or who won World War I, right? I mean, fundamentally, that's a complicated question, right? Or, not to bring up something controversial, but, with the current wars and things going on, like, who's right, as a question. How are we supposed to answer a question like that? How's an AI supposed to answer a question like that? And so when it comes to errors, I mean, I think for me, the solution fundamentally is really to get people to understand the sources of information and make those very, very clear. And for the AI to allow people to draw conclusions, or to get it to draw conclusions from a specific subset of sources that they trust and that they kind of want to believe in. And that is a function of a variety of things: fundamental belief, but then also where your country, your cultural kind of bias. But I don't really, until we as humans define what that means.
Objection, Annika, sorry to stop.
No problem.
Since it's a let's say democratic discussions.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jonathan Branoff. I'm the Senior Advisor to the Committee on National Security of the International Law Section of the American Bar Association. That's the Association of Lawyers. And you're making a good faith analysis that there could be different perspectives on the same fact pattern, which obviously might be irreconcilable and quite different, but all presuming that there's a good faith attempt to portray the truth. But of much greater danger is the intentional malicious use of knowingly lying and creating false realities, creating hallucinations in the part of the receiver of information in order to distort and crush democracy. In the 3 weeks before the last presidential election of the United States, the social media of much of the youth was designed to convince them that all political candidates were unworthy of their trust, that the entire realm of politics was outside of their concern because it was so complicated and there was so much lying that much of the youth of my country sat out the election. And they sat out the election because they were being lied to, but there wasn't time to rectify the lies. So this was creating hallucinations intentionally, which is very different than good faith differences of opinion. So, and also, because of the nature of the internet is anonymity, it's impossible in a short period of time to force the perpetrators to identify themselves. So much of the social media in my country looked like other students, saying one of the political candidates was a prostitute, had prostituted herself. And so some of the women said, well, we can't tolerate this. Or if you vote for this candidate, she's going to bring you into World War III. These things were intentional misuse. So could you address the distinction between good faith different perspectives, which are open to debate, and the intentional malicious use of the internet and digital technologies to distort democracy?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Annika, just short feedback comment. Annika, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. I think to address that point, I think, you know, I would make 2 points. The first one is I completely agree that I don't know if this is just limited to AI. I think this might be technology and social media in general as like a concept, right? I think AI might allow you to scale it fundamentally. But you know, it can be used as a force for good in the sense of, you know, even today, fundamentally, one of the things that I think is in terms of education, tying all the way back to that, I think in the realm and the world of AI, students need to be educated on questioning the validity of information and questioning the sources of information and understanding how to verify information and understanding the importance of doing so. And one of the problems that I think exists is that people aren't really doing that. And the AIs, and you're right, fundamentally, we're not, you know, because there's no demand, because people aren't doing that, we're not catering to that. We're not catering to applications where it's like, okay, let's look at where this information comes from. Is this real or is this not? What's the source of this information? And you know, why are they saying this? What are their intentions? And I think that is a really important thing to include in any AI. And it was kind of what I was trying to get at earlier, but I probably wasn't really that clear about it, is that I think in my personal opinion, every AI response should be sourced with all the information that it came from, and all of those sources of information should be fundamentally questionable, and it would have all the information around it that you can use to question the integrity of the source, the intention behind the source, and where it came from, and similar kind of sources to that, and be able to essentially understand and have a provenance trail of some of the information that is being put out. I think all AIs in their responses should certainly do that. But I also think that it's valuable to use AI as a means to, for some of the examples you were giving about the election, to actually use as a tool to be able to question those things when they arise on social media. For example, even as like a Chrome extension or something like this. So again, I would always go back to the kind of provenance of information that's being used to generate responses, and the kind of intention and understanding of the intention behind their usage of, or their portrayal of information as a fundamental dimension of data that needs to be provided by AI and by the internet in general, which AI can facilitate.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a good introduction to our next speaker, panelist, who's going to give also a short introduction. Saulo, please.
Thank you, and welcome to the last completed session panel. Only two speakers, me and my colleague Annika, and I'd like to say congratulations to you for this beautiful university with a lot of classes, and the idea, the impression that we had when we enter at the building. I put here, there is two different kinds of bias, a data bias and algorithmic bias, two different kind of things. When we have that data input bias, this will create a biased output. It's more or less a technical error. We can say that, because unfair data or algorithms will produce undesirable malfunction, interference caused by wrong or incomplete data or programming. This is the definition of the technical error. And some errors came from data mistakes and or data are not clear, data are not complete, data are false. Data can distort our comprehension of the reality if the data are not complete. And sometimes it's the program that is the algorithm that has some problems, some troubles, because the variables that we put, that we imagine that will occur, don't occur. So we will have a bad programming in this case. So we will have bias, algorithmic bias. So we can create, in some cases, from data or from bad algorithms, technical mistakes that will or reproduce gender prejudices, social status prejudices, racial prejudices, because if the data is contaminated or used by them, they will appear in our output. So it's I can say that is a generalization error, but we can see a kind of technical error. We can say that there is this error due to the generative artificial intelligence operation, the opaqueness of and because we don't know exactly what the generative artificial intelligence does when it works. Also, I heard from a Google programmer that he knows the input, he knows the output, but he doesn't know exactly what happens between the input and the output, because the generative artificial intelligence thinks by itself. So it cannot control the output exactly. So this kind of opaqueness is what we call black box problem. And this is technical errors. from data from our data technical errors. But as my colleague John Granoff told to us, there are intentional actions also in which unfair algorithm and desirable effects are expected by the programmer. And we can see interferences caused by particular interests, fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And nowadays our political elections, our political life is dominated by this kind of intentional bias. It's a great interference in our will, in what we know about the candidates, what we feel about the candidates, what we feel about the other candidates, and so it's very complicated. Let me advance. In education, we can say that this kind of use of artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence in education can bring to us the bias and algorithm discrimination. We have the data failure, we have hallucinations. It's very common to ask for ChatGPT something, and ChatGPT bring to us a complete hallucination. In law, sometimes we try to use the ChatGPT, and ChatGPT brings to us precedents that never existed. Yes, and it's very common. I was at my department analyzing a project from a candidate to the PhD. And a colleague of mine will be his director of thesis. And he read the project and told me, well, my ideas are so clear. We know all my ideas and we wrote better than me. The problem is this article I never wrote. And this journal never existed. ChatGPT created this hallucination, and the candidate was not classified. And we have, with the use in education, the big issue about the authorship plagiarism. But we had Professor Mukdaf from Bahia. Even when the books appeared, Socrates was against the books because the books could break the memory and maybe can create the risk of plagiarism. And we solved this problem nowadays. We have tools to identify the plagiarists. But it's privacy concerns, lack of ability to translate, calculate, like the calculator used by students, they don't allow them to use because they will not learn how to do by themselves the calculations. Lots of critical thinking, reduced attention span and concentration, reduction of memory formation. What more we can say in education, reinforcing stereotypes. Why? Because if the data have bias, it's very common to reproduce this bias in our outputs. So we will maintain the society like the society perceives itself. Achievement gap, widening. People say that some artificial intelligence programs, softwares, have to be paid so poor people will not have the same opportunities than richer people. Lack of representation of the diversity reality, if you have data bias, it's really very complicated. And then the solution is, in education, it's the same solution that we can imagine for the artificial intelligence. The solution that all the regulations that the governments are trying to establish in the whole world, in each country or internationally, is the same. The idea is always appeal for transparency, appeal for explainable algorithm, capable of inspiring confidence, human-centered artificial AI, just with AI, inclusive and sustainable development of AI, respect for ethics, human rights, democratic values and diversity, protection of privacy and personal data, security, reliability and accountability. You will find it in the UNESCO principles, in the CDA Organization for Development, Economic Development, and the principles. All the international regulation asks for this kind of principles to apply for artificial intelligence. And we can imagine some solutions to avoid the risks that artificial intelligence brought to us with using diverse data sets, trying to mix data sets to avoid the bias that someone can contain, implementing explainable models, artificial intelligence models, explaining human oversight mechanisms. Always in my field law, we never sign a decision, a vote, enacted from artificial intelligence without trying to read the pages of the suitcase, read the decision, because we can find hallucinations all the time. We cannot be so confident in the results of the artificial intelligence. Collaboration between educators, policymakers, and artificial intelligence developers in order to create ethical and equitable AI tools. Don't rely solely on real-world data. We need some parameters from the work data, because we know that there are some limitations that we can circumvent and need to circumvent, or we will have bad data. Evaluate data regularly, employ a diverse data team, prioritize the transparency, test AI, machine learning models constantly. The idea is to be aware about the use, during the use of the artificial intelligence. And in education, teachers talk a lot that it's very useful to circumvent the bad use, the misuse of the artificial intelligence, ask the students to do oral presentations, project-based learning assessment, and plagiarism. We know there are a lot of detection tools, artificial intelligence, even artificial intelligence. There are some tools that can detect the use for the product that appear. And finally, we know that this kind of solutions are not easy to implement, because there are costs, there are some technical limitations, there are time limitations, and even the educators are not trained to do that. We have efficient training and support for educators. You see today the Zoom went out. We have only a small box here to the entire room. It's not easy to hear the online presentations. I don't know if you agree with me, but it's common. It's technical limitations. We have to live with them. It's in any situation of the life we have to survive from the difficulties that we experience. So it's my little contribution today, and thanks for your attention. This robot is real. Is FWAAS is a real teacher robot, and it is saying hello to you. My email, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saulo. I have a question for you. Since you have a lot of experience in judiciary system, do you think that actually the AI will reduce the hallucination in justice systems and make them better and improved? We know that actually, law is like very difficult, very complex, but you need to take into account a lot of issues. What do you think? Can we do it? I find it personally like very difficult task. But we in judiciary system and law, we typically depend on human reason and different aspects which occur during this diverse situation which we use.
Yes. Is there anyone that studies law here? No, just my colleague, Reynolds, he's lawyer. Well, I did that in law, but we can say the same in medicine, we can say in engineering. Artificial intelligence will bring solutions to you fast and cheap. It's very difficult to avoid medicine. Nowadays, all the emails, exams are now in Brazil, principally in this field of medicine. Basically, artificial intelligence brings the solution, brings the analysis of the image, and the professional has to read the analysis and agree or not with the analysis. And there is an amazing number that the machine fails less than the humans in this case. But in law, I can say that the machine fails more than humans, because there is some difficulty. I believe that some fields, professional fields, will have the same. We use formal language in some fields, and words have a specific meaning, and sometimes the artificial intelligence doesn't do the difference between the natural language and the technical language, and there's some constructions that, law is basically rhetoric. We deal with literacy, literature. So sometimes there is a connotative sense of the expression, and sometimes artificial intelligence is more or less literal and cannot understand the humor, the aspect of the speech, and create some hallucinations.
This is very nice. I'm a physicist, and I was always wondering, and I would like your opinion as well. We have different models in AI. One are very hierarchical, like neural networks, but you have also the one which are completely randomized, like random forestry. In a normal world, if you ask, I'll just give it a comparison. So if you would say that in the galaxy is life, the AI will say no, because, Earth in the vast space is just a small portion. What do you think, what would be the better model for, let's say, reduce the hallucination? Would be randomized or more hierarchical? What do you think would be having a better implication in the whole system?
Yes, this is $1 million task, because how to reduce hallucination, we need to have the better data set. We need to have the better data set as possible. And we have to imagine the best algorithm to work to us. And it's very difficult nowadays because we cannot imagine all the variations, the variables, the elements that can interfere in our conclusions. And we know that the result will be invaded by this algorithm that we imagine to work to us. The difference maybe will be with the general artificial intelligence, when we will have the ability to think like a human, the singularity as described by some authors, and they expected this kind of singularity in 2036, 2032, 2030, and I heard yesterday a mathematician in a panel where that we will have this general artificial intelligence in 6 months only. The singularity is arriving.
Thank you. Annika has also raised hand. Annika, please go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to help bring a little bit of clarity as well from a more I wanted to bring a bit more clarity from the technical side of some of these models, because fundamentally, I think something that everyone should understand about quote unquote artificial intelligence is that black box that my colleague was referring to. It's ultimately the inputs. So the input to artificial intelligence is essentially requires, of course, a ton of data, right? But it requires almost like how do I explain it? If I were to show you my jumper right now, my sweatshirt, and I told you you had 10 different aspects of this jumper to describe, so you can maybe say the color, the material, the size, I don't know, whatever, the sort of formality of it, various kind of different categories of information to analyze about it. That is what artificial intelligence relies on today. So we have to predefine the features or the kind of information about the information that is important for the model to use to produce a result. And that is the fundamental source of bias and especially with respect to time, because these models are built with a predefined set of almost like a filter or a funnel or like a kind of a strainer, right? Where all of the information that you put into it, only like bits of it actually get into the model, and the model is trained to kind of change its weights and biases based on a subset of that information that you must predefine. And so the problem and the hallucinations come in when you're asking something that requires it to use information outside of that kind of, you know, paradigm, like that world you've built the AI to understand, you know. It understands that there's a color and there's a material and there's a size, and that's it. So once you ask it things outside of this, the innovation with the large language models is that they can fill in that other information with knowledge it already has from that other data. And that's where you really get these like hallucinations from, because ultimately it doesn't know from the way from the information you've given it, it cannot calculate the correct answer without filling in the blanks with its own information. And fundamentally, until we solve that problem, and in my opinion, until we approach AI in a different way, some of these issues that have been discussed, you know, cannot be resolved. But I again highlight the importance of understanding when we speak about these themes and we speak about these concepts of disinformation and bias and all these things, what does that mean, right? What does that mean from a technical perspective? If I were a machine and you were trying to tell me not to be biased, what does that mean? And until we can define that, the machine won't be able to do it. And that's fundamentally missing right now.
Annika, could we say at the end, like the ultimate goal is actually to create more error-resilient society by blending the strengths of human, you know, for the codes as well as the machine intelligence?
I think that's a great way of putting it. It's like, it's almost like there's this kind of, there's this like weird, there's this assumption or this idea in society that AI thinks and that it's very smart and that it can reason, but it actually can't, right? Like we've pre-programmed, you can think of like a small child, we define its world, its scope, its understanding of things. And we as humans can grow that, right? But the AI can't, it's stuck in there. And so what we're missing is really that bridge between humanity and AI, where we're really thinking a lot more about what do we expect this thing to produce? Because if we don't have those requirements, then no one's going to build in that way. People are just going to continue to build things that, you know, first of all, make money because it's obviously private sector. So the incentive is very much geared towards what is commercially viable, what's going to make money. And if that includes more bias, or it includes using malicious data, or it includes things that could affect society from a positive externality perspective, they don't care, right? Or, well, sorry, that's a bit strong. That's not their priority. That's not their ultimate priority. And so if we don't come in, you know, as a force for good, trying to influence the requirements for these AIs, they're never going to do what we want them to do. And we're going to continue sitting and discussing how we reduce bias and how all of this, but we have to actually influence with our human selves a more human dimension in the way these AI approach solving problems.
Annika, thank you very much for your perspective. And since we are at the end and running a little bit late, I'd like to thank you as well as Saulo here with me. And I would like to conclude, as it seems, this perspective is optimistic and actually encourages maybe a balanced, reflective approach to the integration of AI and human behaviors. Of course, we need to be aware of negative implications, but I think that the benefit should overweigh the negative potential of this. With this, I would like also to conclude. There is a
Is it possible while we have online, I'm just going to use this time and ask for the questions, okay?
Yeah, I don't know, are there any additional questions online?
Is that okay?
If not, you know, maybe that can be put in a chat and that can be later answered or sent to the both panelists as well as me. And we can address them maybe later. We are basically 10 minutes over the hour, and straight we had straight 2 hours discussions. Are there any additional wishes here in the audience for questions? If not directly, we can discuss them during the coffee break.
So I cannot ask the question, right?
I mean, you can ask, you want to ask the question? But, Mila, please.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The only reason, yeah, I'll be brief. The only reason I want to ask the question is because we have her online, and that's, I have your time, in other words, so I'm gonna use it. Really quickly, all that we've discussed, and I'm sorry I missed a part of the conversation, but all that we've discussed is basically assuming a separation between the processor, the AI in the processor and the human. But that's not the reality. The reality is convergence of technologies whereby the AI will be fed into a device, and probably it's not going to be a device, it's going to be an organism the size of one human red blood cell. And it will be an enhanced human being that you're interacting with. So I would like to hear your take on the next generation, which is not that next, it's already here. These nanotechnologies having all this collective intelligence fed into it and in the human system.
Annika, just one sentence response, please.
No
Because
problem.
Otherwise, you can send Eva email, or Eva can send this, Mila can send the email.
No problem. I have a very succinct response to this one. Very good question. I think when we were discussing before, it was primarily, I think, more about the algorithmic configuration of the AI based on data. So what you're talking about is an aggregation of even more data, which is amazing and will ultimately help a lot with the ultimate output possible from the algorithms. But the algorithms themselves need more human convergence that we're not talking about as a society right now. And we need to influence the way those are crafted and the way those are designed in order to get the unbiased, hallucination-free results that we are referring to.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you again to both panelists as well as the audience listening. And we need to conclude the session because we have a break and then we continue at 4:20.